There is a moment in every war, not the moment it begins, not the moment the first missile hits, but a quieter, more terrifying moment. The moment when the most powerful nation on earth looks around and realizes it does not know how to stop. That moment has arrived. We are in it right now. And if you are watching from America, this is your war, your money, your soldiers, your gas prices, your economy, and your future on the line. Good evening and welcome to the conflict room, decoding the power struggles driving the world toward crisis. And today I am going to take you through the most important geopolitical story unfolding on this planet in March 2026. Not the explosions, not the body count, but something far more dangerous. The strategic trap that the United States walked directly into with both eyes open and from which there is currently no clear exit. Let me take you back to February 28th, 2026, a Saturday morning in Tehran. At approximately 0940 Iran Standard Time, a large plume of smoke rose above the Iranian capital. This initial blast, closely followed by a series of secondary explosions, occurred within the precinct of governmental offices. By Tencar, reports indicated nearly 30 separate detonations across the city. The United States and Israel had launched one of the most dramatic military operations in modern history, a surprise assault on Iran's leadership, military infrastructure, and nuclear facilities. They killed the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. They destroyed Iran's Navy and Air Force. They struck missile production sites, IRGC headquarters, nuclear facilities, and government buildings. By every conventional military measure, this should have been the beginning of the end for the Islamic Republic. It was not. It was the beginning of a trap. And today, 26 days later, America is inside it, the door is closing, and nobody in Washington has a key. The second Trump administration had reimposed maximum pressure on Iran. The Defense Intelligence Agency concluded in 2025 it would be a decade before Iran would be able to gain the technical skill to produce an arsenal of missiles that could reach the United States. The plan made sense on paper. Crush the economy, decapitate the leadership, watch the regime collapse, move on, clean, fast, decisive, the kind of war Trump promised he would never fight. No forever wars, no boots on the ground, no quagmires. And yet, here we are. Despite the U.S. expectation of structural collapse, Iran's defensive military operations commenced immediately, and the political leadership continued to function. A key factor in preventing the paralysis of Tehran was the failure to eliminate the president and the Speaker of the Parliament. Senior political and military officials had pre-designated successors, ensuring continuity of command. The regime did not fall. The government did not dissolve. The Iranian military did not surrender. Instead, Iran did something the Trump administration clearly did not expect. It reached into its decades-long playbook for asymmetric warfare and began doing exactly what it has always threatened to do. It closed the Strait of Hormuz. Here's why that changes everything, and I mean everything. More than 80% of the crude oil and liquefied natural gas that passes through the Strait of Hormuz heads to Asia, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh are all major importers of LNG from Qatar, which said it was slashing its export capacity by 17% because of Iranian attacks and warned it would be forced to declare force majeure for up to 5 years on some long-term LNG contracts. The Strait of Hormuz is not a shipping lane. It is the circulatory system of the global economy. Roughly 20% of all the world's oil and gas passes through a waterway that, at its narrowest point, is only 21 miles wide. And Iran, with mines, drones, missiles, and gunboats, has effectively shut it down. Not completely, but enough. Enough to send oil prices soaring, enough to trigger alarm bells at every major central bank on Earth. The head of the International Energy Agency described the situation as the greatest global energy security challenge in history. Think about what it means when the head of the IEA, a man who has managed every energy crisis from the 2008 financial crash to the Russia-Ukraine war, says this is the worst energy shock in the history of his organization. This is not hyperbole. This is the voice of someone looking at the data in real time and choosing his words very carefully. And where is America in all of this? U.S. officials are furiously trying to avert a potential months-long closure of the strait. They privately acknowledge that reopening the key waterway is a problem without a clear solution, and dependent at least in part on what lengths Trump is willing to go to force the Iranian regime's hand. Privately. That word matters. In public, the Trump administration is projecting strength. Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, stood in front of cameras on March 8th and told CBS News, "This is only just the beginning." Trump himself declared that Iran's military had been completely destroyed. He said America had blown Iran off the map. He said the war was way ahead of schedule and could be declared complete. But behind those words, behind the cameras, behind the briefings, the reality was something else entirely. Trump and his allies insist they were always prepared for Iran to block the strait. Yet the Republican president's erratic strategy has fueled criticism that he is grasping for answers after going to war without a clear exit plan. No exit plan. Let those three words sit with you for a moment. The most powerful military on earth launched a war against a nation of 85 million people, a nation with a sophisticated missile arsenal, a network of regional proxies stretching from Lebanon to Iraq to Yemen, and a 21-mile chokehold on global oil supply without a plan for how to end it. Analysts said Trump launched the war without a clear goal and misjudged how Tehran would respond. And the evidence of that miscalculation is written across every headline from the past 4 weeks. Look at what Trump has actually said during this war, because the contradiction is staggering. On March 8th, Hegseth said the attacks were aimed at ending 47 years of the regime's existence. The next day, Trump told the same network the war was very complete, pretty much. Then on March 9th, Trump said one could say the war was both complete and just beginning. Later that same day, the president said he had already won in many ways, but we haven't won enough, and promised to go further. Then on March 11th, Trump said, "We don't want to leave early, do we? We've got to finish the job." Then on March 20th, he said he was considering winding down military operations. Then on March 22nd, he threatened to obliterate Iran's power plants. Then on March 23rd, he announced productive peace talks. Then Iran denied the talks ever happened. This is not a strategy. Days of erratic, contradictory rhetoric from Trump and the administration's inability to cite a consistent rationale for the war or to plot an exit strategy mean that any single U.S. statement lacks credibility. And it gets worse, because it is not just that America has no exit. It is that every door America tries to open leads to another trap. Let me walk you through each one, because this is the part that should frighten every American watching this video. The first door is military force. Trump wanted to reopen the Strait of Hormuz by bombing Iran's coastal positions, drones, and missile sites. The problem is this. U.S. military officials said they have carried out heavy bombardments of Iran's coast, including with bunker buster bombs, but still have not been able to limit Tehran's capacity to disrupt the Strait of Hormuz. Iran is not using a centralized missile system that can be bombed into silence. It is using small, dispersed, mobile launchers. Drones launched from the backs of trucks, naval mines planted in the water. U.S. officials told CBS News that current American intelligence assessments show there are at least a dozen Iranian mines in the strait, specifically the Iranian-manufactured Maham-3 and Maham-7 limpet mines. Mines that stick to the hull of ships below the waterline. Mines that do not need to be fired from a base that can be bombed. Mines that are already in the water. The U.S. Navy can sweep mines, but not quickly, not safely, and not while Iran keeps laying more. You bomb a missile launcher, Iran replaces it the next morning. You sweep a mine, Iran plants 2 more the next night. This is not a problem with a military solution. This is asymmetric warfare doing exactly what it was designed to do. The second door is ground troops. If bombing cannot open the strait, what about seizing the coastline? The question of sending ground troops into Iran has rattled some Republicans. Repser Derek Van Orden, a former Navy SEAL, specifically advised the administration against any boots on the ground. And Repser Tim Burchett of Tennessee said, "I think we need to find an exit strategy as fast as possible." Even Trump's own Republican allies in private and increasingly in public are saying the words nobody in this administration wants to hear: get out. In a broader sense, Trump's new dilemma is fueling concern that he lacks a strategy or an endgame for a war that he launched without consulting Congress or selling the American people on its costs. And here is the cruel arithmetic of ground troops. Any operation significant enough to actually seize and hold Iranian coastline or islands in the Strait would require tens of thousands of soldiers, months of logistical buildup, and the opening of a land war in one of the most complex and contested regions on Earth. Any decision to send troops into action would represent a huge risk for Trump because it could result in significant American casualties, invite far worse economic shockwaves than those already caused by Iran's closure of the Strait, and a prolonged war could consume the president's second term and legacy after he won power adamant that he'd end wars, not start them. The third door is diplomacy. And this is where the story gets most revealing, because what happened in the last 48 hours, right up to today, March 26, 2026, is a masterclass in just how deeply America is trapped. Trump posted on his Truth Social platform that the U.S. and Iran had held very good and productive conversations regarding a complete and total resolution of hostilities in the Middle East. He said, while talks continue throughout the week, the U.S. is postponing attacks on Iran's power plants and energy infrastructure for 5 days. 5 days. A president who launched a war without a plan is now buying himself 5 days of breathing room by announcing peace talks that the other side has denied having. Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi said that an exchange of messages between the two countries via mediators does not mean negotiations with the U.S. And Iran's counteroffer, announced just yesterday, March 25th, makes the depth of America's trap perfectly clear. Iran's conditions include safeguards against future attacks on Iran, the payment of war reparations, and most explosively, recognition of Iranian sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. Read that last one again. Iran is demanding that the United States formally recognize that Iran owns and controls the waterway through which 20% of the world's oil passes. This is not a negotiating position. This is Iran telling America, you started a war to weaken us, and now we are going to use that war to make ourselves permanently stronger. It is a measure of how the war has slipped beyond Trump's control that the Strait, which was open to all tanker traffic when the conflict began, has now become a key U.S. demand in negotiations. America went to war to destroy Iran's power. And the Strait, which was never under threat before, is now closed, mined, and the subject of an Iranian sovereignty claim. The war made the situation dramatically worse. And then there is the fourth door, the economic escape valve, which has also slammed shut. Trump's Treasury Department made its latest attempt to get a handle on soaring gas prices by lifting sanctions on some Iranian oil for the first time in decades. The goal was to send millions more barrels of oil into the global market. But it is not clear how much of a dent that would make in lowering pump prices or how the administration could prevent Iran from cashing in on the renewed sales. Think about the extraordinary absurdity of that moment. America launched a war to destroy Iran's economy, to collapse the regime through maximum pressure, and then 3 weeks into that war, began lifting the sanctions that were the primary tool of that pressure because gas prices were rising and Republican congressmen were panicking about the midterm elections. America weakened its own leverage against Iran in order to manage the domestic political fallout of a war America started. Iran did not need to do anything. The trap closed by itself. The head of the International Energy Agency said the crisis in the Middle East has had a worse impact on oil than the two oil shocks of the 1970s combined, and a worse effect on gas markets than the Russia-Ukraine war. The 1970s oil shocks caused a global recession, destroyed a presidency, and reshaped the entire international order. What we are looking at right now is worse than that, and America, the country that launched this war, is watching its own economic foundations shake, while its president cycles through ultimatums that he then walks back the same day he issues them. But here's the dimension of this story that is most dangerous for America's long-term future, and that almost nobody is talking about loudly enough. This war is not just hurting America in the Middle East. It is reshaping the entire global strategic order in ways that will outlast this conflict by decades. The most visible beneficiary of the Iran conflict is Russia. The Russian economy, battered by Western sanctions and the immense costs of the war in Ukraine, was facing a precarious 2026. Russia built its federal budget on oil price assumptions of roughly $60 a barrel. Instead, the eruption of war in the Gulf sent Brent crude surging toward $120 a barrel. This windfall has rescued the Russian war budget, providing the Kremlin with the capital it needs to sustain its military operations in Europe. Every day that the Strait of Hormuz stays closed, every day that oil prices stay elevated, Russia collects a windfall. Vladimir Putin did not fire a single missile in this war. He did not spend a single ruble. And yet the Iran war is funding his military operations in Ukraine more effectively than any budget he could have drafted himself. America trapped itself, and in doing so, handed its most dangerous geopolitical rival a lifeline. And China is watching every single move, taking notes, running models, and drawing conclusions about what it would look like to challenge American military power in the Taiwan Strait. Beijing's reported provision of advanced radar systems to Tehran underscores a deepening technological partnership. Russia is demonstrating that it can impose costs on the United States far beyond the borders of Ukraine. Beijing, meanwhile, is observing how United States carrier strike groups operate under fire, refining its own doctrines for potential conflicts in the Indo-Pacific. China does not need to fight America. It just needs to watch America fight Iran. Every vulnerability exposed in the Gulf, every mine that American ships cannot clear, every Iranian drone that defeats a naval defense system, every week that the strait stays closed, is a data point that Beijing's military planners are incorporating into their Taiwan planning right now. By deepening confrontation with Iran while simultaneously relieving economic pressure on Russia, the United States is actively accelerating the alignment it has historically sought to prevent. The longer it remains engaged in the Middle East, the more time and space Moscow and Beijing have to consolidate their partnership. For half a century, from Nixon's opening of China to Reagan's late Cold War strategy, American grand strategy was built on one foundational principle: prevent Russia and China from forming a permanent alliance. That principle shaped everything. And this war launched in 4 weeks, without a congressional vote, without allied support, without an exit plan, is doing more damage to that foundational principle than anything that has happened in decades. Beyond the Middle East, this war now threatens the entire global economy. In parts of Asia, the impact is being felt not only in rising fuel and liquefied gas prices, but in supply constraints. Several countries in South and Southeast Asia are already experiencing energy rationing, resulting in shortened work weeks, business closures, and partial school shutdowns. Europe faces its own vulnerabilities. With the end of winter providing some relief, gas reserves nevertheless remain low. Russia has been quick to offer Europe an energy lifeline, which Europeans have so far rejected, determined to uphold their sanctions. Russia is offering energy to Europe. Europe is refusing for now. But every week this war continues. That calculation becomes harder to maintain. The pressure on European governments from their own populations facing rising energy costs and a looming recession is building. And every week it builds, Russia gets closer to what it has wanted for years: a fracture in the transatlantic alliance. Now let us come to today, March 26, 2026, and what it tells us about where this goes next. A former U.S. Middle East peace negotiator told CNN that the Iranians are going to demand a price that Donald Trump is not prepared to pay, and that leaves him with the reality of having to mount a major operation, not just to open the straits, but to keep them open. Keep them open. That is the phrase that should stop every American in their tracks. Even if the U.S. military manages to force the strait open, even if it seizes islands, sweeps mines, destroys every Iranian coastal battery, it would then have to maintain a permanent military presence in one of the most contested waterways on Earth to keep it open forever. Because the moment American forces leave, Iran or whoever controls Iranian territory will close it again. Keeping the strait open is not a military operation. It is an indefinite occupation, and Trump promised no forever wars. This leaves Trump facing a strategic trap. He must choose between the political cost of failing to achieve his regime change objectives and the political cost of walking back on his domestic promise of no more forever wars. The only viable exit strategy is to manufacture the appearance of victory, declaring that the objectives have been met, even when they clearly have not. That is the corner America has been painted into. Not a military corner, a political one. Trump can claim victory. He can say Iran's military is destroyed, which is largely true. He can say the nuclear program has been set back, which intelligence assessments confirm. He can say he eliminated Khamenei and the IRGC leadership, which happened. And then he can leave while the Strait of Hormuz stays effectively closed, while Iran's new leadership consolidates power, while oil prices remain elevated, while Russia banks its windfall, and while China completes its Taiwan military preparations. He can declare victory, but the world will know what happened. Even if Trump manages to save face domestically, the war has already been lost at the international level. And what about the Iranian people, the 85 million civilians caught inside this disaster? The strikes intensified economic pressures that were already severe, while global markets reacted to fears of supply chain disruptions. Prior to the conflict, Iran's economy was strained by sanctions, protests, and a depreciating rial, with inflation exceeding 40% in 2025. These are people who were already suffering before the first American missile hit. People who took to the streets in January 2026, demanding freedom, and who America said it wanted to help. An increasing concern among many American allies is that a future Iranian regime will make efforts to sprint toward developing a nuclear weapon because they view the military campaign as a threat to their existence. America went to war to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. And the most likely long-term consequence of that war is that whoever governs Iran next, whether it is the IRGC hardliners, a military council, or even a reformed government, will pursue a nuclear weapon with absolute urgency because they will have watched what happened to a country that did not have one. Iran's strategy of drone and missile strikes is neither random nor desperate. It is a coherent strategy designed to steadily increase the political and economic costs of continued U.S. and Israeli military operations. Iran's goal is not merely to put an end to the current fighting, but to inflict sufficient pain to ensure the United States and Israel do not repeat this again. Iran is not flailing. Iran is not losing in any strategically meaningful sense. Iran's leadership is dead, but its institutions are functioning. Its military is degraded, but its asymmetric capabilities are intact. Its economy is shattered, but oil prices are higher than they have been in years, which ironically benefits Iran's remaining oil exports. And its primary strategic weapon, the Strait of Hormuz, is more powerful today than it has ever been, because the world has just watched Iran demonstrate that it is willing and able to use it. Oman's foreign minister, who served as negotiator in the now scuttled talks, argued in an article in The Economist that America has lost control of its own foreign policy. He wrote, "It should now be clear that for Israel to achieve its stated objective will require a long military campaign to which America would have to commit troops on the ground, opening a new front in the forever wars, which President Donald Trump previously vowed to end." The foreign minister of Oman, a country that has maintained diplomatic ties with both Washington and Tehran for decades, a country that has served as America's back channel to Iran for years, is saying publicly what many are saying privately. America has lost control, not of the battlefield, of the strategy itself. This is where we are as of today, March 26, 2026. Trump is in a 5-day pause, a ceasefire in everything but name, while talking about talks that Iran says are not talks. Iran has rejected his proposal and laid out 5 conditions that include war reparations and sovereignty over the strait. Thousands of American Marines are heading to the region. The S&P 500 has dropped roughly 4.5% since the war began. The global economy faces simultaneously the worst oil shock and the worst gas market disruption in history. Russia is funding its Ukraine war on the profits of American miscalculation. China is studying every frame of this conflict for application in the Taiwan Strait. And somewhere in a back channel, through Pakistan, through Oman, through intermediaries, nobody will name publicly. 2 governments are trying to find a way to let each other off the hook without admitting to the world that neither of them knows how to end what they started. America is not losing this war in the traditional sense. Its military superiority is not in question. But the real question is not whether the United States can destroy Iran's capabilities, but whether it can end the Islamic Republic and control what follows. Air superiority is a military condition. Regime change is a political outcome. When it comes to discussing American strikes on Iran, people often confuse the two as if one automatically causes the other. It does not. You can bomb every radar installation, every missile launcher, every naval vessel, and still have no answer for what comes next, because what comes next is not a military problem. It is a political one. And political problems do not get solved with bunker busters. The trap was always there. America walked into it with both eyes open. The question now, the question that will define Trump's legacy, America's credibility, and the global order for the next generation is not whether America is trapped. It is, what does America do next? Does it commit fully ground troops, permanent presence, the kind of engagement Trump promised he would never authorize? Does it declare victory and withdraw, leaving the strait in Iran's hands, oil prices elevated, and America's allies wondering whether Washington's promises mean anything? Or does it find some back-channel arrangement that lets both sides claim what they need to claim, while the world quietly rearranges itself around the new reality of American limits? There is no clean answer. There is no door that leads cleanly out. Every exit has a cost. Every path forward has a trap of its own. And that, right there, is the definition of being trapped. America started a war it could not lose militarily, and it is discovering 4 weeks in that military victory and strategic success are not the same thing. So here's my question for you, and I want you to answer this in the comments because I read every single one. Given everything you have just heard, the mines in the strait, the Iran conditions, the Russia windfall, the China calculations, the Republican panic over midterms, the absence of an exit plan, do you believe Donald Trump will find a way out of this trap that preserves American credibility? Or has the United States crossed a threshold in this war where, regardless of what happens next, the world will never see American power the same way again? Tell me what you think. Because this is not just a story about Iran. This is a story about the future of American leadership. And every one of us is going to live with the answer.